So by now, you've probably heard advice given to women like, we need to be more assertive and we need to ask for more money. But it's not always easy to get these things right, because these are the places where women get stuck in what we call the double bind. So we're told to be assertive, and yet when we try to assert ourselves, it's often interpreted as aggressive. And this is the result of gender bias, which can be a tricky maze to get through if you don't understand how gender affects us every day. And to help us understand better this situation so that we can navigate with more success, we are so lucky to have social scientist Malia Mason with us today. I'm Jill Avey, a career success coach, and this is SisterSmart Leadership, the show that explores how women can rise from director to vice president and beyond by fully leaning into their feminine energy as their biggest advantage. Let's get you one step closer to the recognition and promotion you deserve. Malia teaches negotiations and co-directs the Women in Leadership Executive Education Program at Columbia Business School. In addition to training Columbia graduates, she is also a trainer and consultant for a variety of sectors, including financial services, media, tech, and telecom, and the arts. So thanks so much for joining me today.
What a pleasure to be here, Jill. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about this.
Yes. Okay, so I would love to talk about the intersection of your two specialties. So negotiation and how that relates to women. So first, can we talk about what are the gender biases that come into a negotiation?
Sure. So I think it's useful to start with what we call descriptive stereotypes. So we have assumptions about what males and females in general are like, right? So we tend to assume that females are other-oriented and they're selfless and they're communal. We tend to assume that men are agentic, they are action-oriented, they're competitive. So those assumptions might be wrong, but they matter for a number of reasons. One key reason why they matter is they tend to become what we call prescriptive stereotypes, or just thoughts, you could say. So expectations we have for what women and men should be like, right? And these are expectations that others bring to bear to interactions with us. But they're also expectations we have of ourselves in different settings. And so there's a ton of social science research on stereotypes. And there is, quite a bit of research on the role that descriptive and prescriptive stereotypes have in negotiation settings. And as I think you captured in your intro, one of the challenges that I think women in particular face is that it's hard to do well in negotiation situations if you're not willing to be assertive, right? If you're not willing to make ambitious asks. And it's more likely that a given ask of, I want a 10% raise, will be seen as aggressive when it comes from a female as compared to when it comes from a male, because of these expectations we have of how women versus men should be.
And I love what you're bringing up too about stereotypes, is that when we talk about gender, we're going to be talking in stereotypes because we're talking about the whole bell curve. And of course, when we talk about individuals, they're going to fall somewhere on that bell curve and not be the mean, which is, what we're talking about for our sake of, in social science, we have to pull that all together, and otherwise we can't learn from it. So I just want to make that caveat that, of course, the things that we're talking about, there's going to be a million exceptions to what we're talking about, but there are also these social norms that we live with every day. And so that's where it's really important for us to understand these norms, because we see women get penalized for not acting within their gender norms from both men and women, which I find really interesting.
Yes, I find it really interesting myself. And we've collected data in certain settings where we find that actually women penalize other women more than men do. So I think it's important to be clear that it's not just that males are like, wow, she's assertive. It's also other females holding, their sisters to a different standard.
Yeah. When we talked earlier, there was 3 areas where you talked about how gender bias can come into a negotiation. Can you share that with our audience?
Yes. So, I think you can put the research on the role that gender plays in negotiations into 3 basic buckets. I would say that the first bucket is kind of the experience that people have negotiating as a function of their gender. And I think in general, women tend to express greater anxiety about negotiating. They express greater concern with the social consequences associated with asking for things from others, as compared to men. And so I think there's a set of studies that have looked at that. The second bucket would be these expectancies that we talked about earlier. So the expectations we have of negotiators as a function of whether they're a male or a female, and the consequences associated with having these stereotypes or expectations of how males versus females should behave. And I think it's worth saying that like these buckets are related, right? Because it's not crazy. We're going back to the first bucket, the experience negotiating. I don't think it's crazy that women are more concerned with the social consequences of asking, or
Right.
that they're more nervous about asking, because the second bucket shows us that they're more likely to receive some kind of backlash when they make a bit ambitious ask. So there's a second, I guess, bucket of research that looks at, the expectations we have of males versus females and how that could end up mattering. And then I would say the third bucket, you might describe it as the styles males versus females have in negotiation situations. And we might describe males as exhibiting behaviors that are more competitive. So on average, they make more ambitious requests. I would say they get to the numbers more quickly than females. I would say that women ask more questions, right? Which is actually a real benefit in most negotiation situations. So those would be the three buckets that exist where the research on negotiations are concerned.
Okay, so we have the experience, which is how women go about the negotiation is a little different. That's often due to the expectations of how we're supposed to act. And I'm saying that with air quotes. And then our actual behaviors because of that shifts as well. Now, what kinds of places are you thinking about negotiation happening? I go straight to the job interview and negotiating a salary, but I bet there's more to it than that.
Yes. And I think that's where most people's minds go to when they think about negotiations. What comes to mind for them are those very formal negotiation experiences. Whenever I talk to people about negotiations, they want to know, like, how can I negotiate a better salary? Right. So I think that's what a lot of people think about. And I think that most people think about negotiations too narrowly, right? Like, of course, that's a negotiation that matters, but you're not going to have that negotiation that often in your career. Most of us will probably have it a few times, if that. But I think that like any situation where you're making a decision with somebody else, that is a negotiation as far as I'm concerned, right? And so all of us are experts, frankly. Like, we spend our days trying to cajole people to do things, like our kids, trying to reach compromises with people. We work in teams a ton in the workplace. And so everybody who's watching this is a lay expert. They've got a set of skills. They've got a toolkit, might require some refining and a more sophisticated way of thinking about negotiations. But I think we do this all day long and we don't even necessarily realize it.
That's so interesting to think about all those different places, because I skipped negotiations class when I was in business school because I wasn't going into sales. And so I thought, oh, well, and I had actually been in sales, so I thought I had some skill at it. But I was a leader of cross-functional teams. And so there's a huge amount of negotiation there to try to get everybody. You've got all of these disparate people trying to get to this destination at the same time, but they all have competing priorities. And so that's a big one that I think, a lot of collaboration is happening in any company.
Yeah.
So what are some ways that women could think about that experience?
I love the question. And I love the question in part because the current thinking about the role that gender plays in negotiations is that like it matters in some situations more than in others. And I think the current kind of thinking is that gender matters a ton in situations where it's like not clear whether something's negotiable. So if we're talking about, the formal exchanges where everyone agrees that like right now what's going to happen is we're going to negotiate this contract. I'm going to hire you on or I'm going to buy your software. Like, gender matters far less than in situations where, you have to self-initiate and self-promote.
Wow, yeah.
And that's where gender tends to matter a lot. Women are less likely to try to shape things. And like it matters, right? Like, you're asked to take on a leadership role. You're asked to lead a new project. Are you blinded by your flattery? Or does it occur to you, all right, like, what's the version of this that I can nail? How can I change the scope of this? How can I maybe change the timeline? Should I be asking for more resources? Should I be asking for access to senior leadership who can help me sell this or who can give me feedback? What's the version of this that I'd be happy doing and not resentful doing? Even as a negotiations expert or scholar, have found myself in these situations where I'm approached with an opportunity and I'm like, yes, thank you. Instead of like, let me shape this and negotiate the terms under which I'll do this thing.
That one piece right there could be career changing for people to just shift that.
Yeah. I mean, Jill, it's not even clear to me that you need to be that good at negotiating. I think you just need to do it. Like, one negotiation can matter a ton.
Yeah. Yeah. Another place where I see women get really trapped is in getting overburdened with work and then feeling like they don't have a say. Yeah, like, okay, I remember a time when I had way too much to do, like more work than was humanly possible, no matter how many hours I worked. And I went to my boss and I said, okay, I've got these 2 brochures that have to come together at the same time. I can't do them both. What can we do? And he said, too bad. You have to make it happen. And so I didn't sleep a lot and I did make it happen. So proving to him that I could and proving to him that, that I didn't need more resources to do it. And so I was able the next season to find a different solution, through my own innovation. But that's the kind of situation I hear a lot with my clients is that, there's just no giving. Like they're just management is piling on more and more and more, and there's no relief in sight. And when they push back, then they're just seen as not wanting to do things or not capable or, things like that. And that's what they're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Again, love this question too, because it is about negotiating like the contours of your role, really. You're hired, you've got this job description. Some of what you're asked to do, I think, is in the job description. And so much of what we end up doing isn't in the job description. That's probably why it has that like last bullet point that says something else as like, and other responsibilities as needed.
Exactly.
But there's a literature that's like emerging on what they call non-promotable work.
Yeah.
And the thinking is that, not surprisingly, women do more of this than men do. And there's a number of reasons for why this is true. And some of it is women are more likely to be asked to take on this like administrivia. So these are activities that like are not going to push the needle where your career is concerned. You're not going to learn anything from them. They're not going to affect your performance evaluation. He could do it. And so I think to your earlier question, like women are more likely to be asked to do it, and women are less comfortable declining the ask. But I think it is also true that women are more likely to volunteer, right? They're in a group setting.
We often see something that needs to happen and we raise our hand because, we want to be helpful sometimes. And yeah.
Yes. And I feel like now that is an easy fix. All right. Right. Like you started with something that I think is a less easy fix. It's a conversation worth having and I want to have it, but I want to start with the like easy fix first, which is just everybody has the power within them to not raise their hand.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
And I think, maybe I'm going to replace the hand raising with a sip of my water, right? Or like adding an activity can often make it easier to stop doing something that's habitual. I think sometimes maybe it's like, hey, I'm going to do it this time, but I need someone else to do it next time. Right. So just going on record, like I'm doing it this time, but I'm not doing it next time.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like your inner Girl Scout is released and you're like, sure, sign me up. I'll do it. I have nothing else to do. So I do want to say that because I think there is a lot of evidence to suggest that women are more likely to do it. But I think separate from that, there's like, well, what do you do when you're asked? And how can you manage that more effectively? One, you can say no, right? All of us have to do a little bit of this stuff, right? Like, it's an organization. We need to take care of it. We need to take turns caring for it. But I think you need to be careful about how you say yes, right? So if you're asked to do the thing and you're like, okay, I'll do it this time. I think it's not a sure no problem. I think it's can I get back to you tomorrow? I need to make sure I can take this on, because there is research on this. People have found that if you just say sure, no problem, you'll get less credit for doing it. And people are more likely to come back to you with a request like this in the future. So I think that's one thing. I think there's suggesting what my co-director, Trish Gorman, likes to suggest is suggesting Steve. So Steve is that person at the workplace who is, underutilized, right? And so I think that can be effective, because again, the person who's asking it probably just wants to get it off their plate. I would go for the presumptive close. They might say, well, Steve's not very good at this kind of thing. And it's like, I'm happy to give him my notes from the last few years. So like, this is an experience I had as a junior person where we were trying to figure out who was going to do the holiday cards, right? It's like every year I was doing the holiday cards and I'm like, it isn't my responsibility to find a replacement for me. It truly isn't. But at a certain point, I'm like, I'm not doing the holiday cards again. And so I was waiting for them to say, hey, are you ready to do holiday cards? Hey, I think we should do Steve. Well, Steve's not very organized. Well, you know what? It's sometimes hard. I'll give him my notes. Oh, there's a website that's already set up. I'm out.
Yeah, I love that. Because you always get that, like, oh, but you're so good at it,
I know.
Yeah, and being good at something, I mean, can be, its own double-edged sword. And I think there's some wisdom in, not doing it really well either. You don't have to give it 100%. So when we're talking about non-promotable work, that makes me think about setting boundaries. And we talk a lot about setting boundaries in my leadership program. How can we bring negotiation into that?
Yeah. I mean, I think setting boundaries is an act of negotiating, really, truly. And so anything you can do to try to not just mindlessly agree to something is shaping your role, and it is negotiating, and it is establishing a boundary, right? To me, again, like establishing a boundary and saying no, that's an act of negotiation, right? I mean, other thoughts that I have about how you can do this more effectively, I think if the request is coming from your manager, just making sure that your manager is clear about what's on your plate. So like coming to meetings you have with your manager with an agenda, giving them some updates that might include some of this low promotable work, just to sort of remind them, this is what's on my plate here. I also think that going on record as to what activities you would like to help with can be helpful. I think many of us hesitate to express an interest in that leadership role because we're worried that, whoever we're talking to is going to be like, oh, you're not qualified for that, But I think if you can go on record, like, this is where I'd like to take my career. And therefore, these are the kinds of things that are a good fit for me. I think that can be really helpful, because most managers do want to grow their people and be efficacious, but you need to be able to communicate to them, like, this is what appeals to me. And many of us just don't even know. I also think that, like, once you have a high status role, people are far less likely to approach you with, like, the administrivia.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, even raising your status within your role can help with that quite a lot.
I like that.
And I love what you're saying here, because the non-promotable work, kind of setting boundaries around that and being clear about where you want to go, but also being that team player that says, hey, I'll do some of this because we all need to pitch in. Because, I think sometimes the whole boundary setting and saying no conversation could be interpreted as I'm only out for myself and I'm only doing the work that's benefiting me. And that in general isn't going to be a benefit in the long run, because then you're not seen as that kind of employee that I need, because, at the end of the day, the manager needs to get all of this stuff done. And so you're always going to have these parts of your job that you don't like. And so if we can share that and rotate it around, now it's so much more palatable for everybody. And you're not saying no forever. It's just, how about for a little while instead?
Back to your question earlier about teams, a good team member does backup behavior. Something's going to fall through the cracks, and a good team member would step up and like help. You just don't want to always be the one doing the backup behaviors. And, recognize that nobody is keeping track of all the backup behaviors that you're engaging in. There's no central repository at the institution of it. There should be, right? But there is none. And so I think anything you can do to like make it salient for people, especially make it salient for the source of the request, I think is in your interest.
What are some ways that we can do that?
Well, I gave you one earlier, which is just like going to the meeting with like an agenda that includes, it's not all that important, but it might be like, and other stuff, final bullet point, and other stuff, the 6 things you were doing.
Yeah.
I think like, to me, that's the answer that comes to mind.
Yeah. And I think we forget that when we're giving our manager the scope of what we're dealing with and trying to negotiate that workload, we forget to include all of the other stuff. And it really does add up.
And you don't want to be like, you want to signal that you know how to prioritize things. You don't want to waste their time talking about trivial stuff. But I also just think it's an opportunity for them to be like, hey, and don't forget I'm doing all these things. Let me give you a quick update.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that like this is where allies can be helpful, right? Where friends find opportunities to be like, hey, well, folks, Malia did it last time.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need someone else to step up. So, and to me, that's just like kind of strategically using your network.
Yeah. And thinking ahead to what might be asked of you and having that person on deck that, maybe you prep them a little bit of like, I don't want to do this year. And, my time's up and I've served my tenure and I'm now ready to pass that torch.
And this is what I'm trying to do with my career, right? Like, I think having people at the organization who know what you're trying to do, who, are maybe your level, who are your cheerleaders, who might remind people for you, like, hey, she's been doing a lot of this. It would be nice if someone else could do it.
So now let's go back to the negotiation itself. And are there any like tangible tools that women can use to do better in their negotiations?
Absolutely. Let me just say that I think that there's this assumption that negotiations are these competitive exchanges. That's like, to do well in negotiation, you just have to bludgeon your partner harder and faster than they can bludgeon you. And, there are going to be situations where you're going to have to push and assert, but that's a very narrow view of what negotiations are and how to be effective at them. Just as important, I think, is being able to foster cooperation. It is very hard to do well in a negotiation if your negotiation partner isn't willing to help. You need them to trust you. You need them to share information. Like, you need them to say yes, okay? And like, you are dependent on them. And so I think it's just worth, I'm going to answer your question, but I think it's just worth telling the audience that like, there are a lot of behaviors that women are more inclined to engage in on average than men that can serve them well in negotiations. Asking questions, softening their speech. I actually think that works to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just this cooperative exchange. You do also need to say, I think it's appropriate to ask for a 15% raise.
Mm-hmm.
You still need to come with the ambitious figure, but it isn't just this like back and forth competitive exchange. Any complex negotiation is going to require cooperation. It's going to require information sharing. And that really isn't going to happen unless your negotiation partner trusts you. Again, we're generalizing over distributions, but I think that on average, women are better at fostering relationships and like fostering mutual trust, and that serves them well in negotiations. Back to your actual question, it is going to be important in most negotiation situations for you to make that ambitious request. You're hoping to get, a 10% raise. You kind of need to ask for 15. Build yourself some room to concede and still hit that ambitious but realistic goal. It has to be realistic. Okay. So you're going to need to be able to do that. And that's, I think, where this double bind thing comes in. But I think that, you do that and you also build the rapport. Okay. And you also express warmth and you also ask the questions. Okay. So it isn't just, I need 15%.
Yeah.
It is. 'Cause sometimes I feel like women think that like they've got this message that they're not being assertive enough in negotiations. And so they think that they need to go in there and be like 15%. I need it. Right? And no,
Exactly.
right? It's like you build the rapport. It's so great to see you. How's the family? I'm really excited about talking to you. I hope we can find something that works. I want it to be fair. My sense is that 15% is consistent with market.
I'd
So
like to be here for a long time. I love this team.
Exactly. I'm worth it. I think it's worth saying that. Other like tactics, it isn't easy to come up with tactics that yield value but don't damage relationships, right? Like they tend to be at odds with each other. So we have a paper looking at range offers. You're hoping to get a 10% raise. Here we are talking about salary negotiations, right? Like, and people are like, and your boss says, well, how much were you expecting? You're hoping to get 10%. You might say, I was hoping to get, 12 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? What we find is that what we call a bolstered range, a well-constructed range, builds good deal terms, but doesn't damage relationships because you seem flexible.
Yeah.
So it's a way for you to work in that more ambitious figure, a low risk way. You just said 15, or sorry, in this example, I said 12 to 15. If you just said 15, you're worried that that's too ambitious. So you say 12 to 15.
Yeah.
You can still bring that ambitious figure in, but it's a softer approach to being assertive.
And I find that sometimes if you just come in with the number that you want, then it's too direct and it sort of shuts the conversation down. And you can get no, we can't do that,
Yep.
Instead of a counter offer. And I think we're always scared that would happen, whether or not it really does.
Yep. And other thoughts that I have. So we also have some work looking at the role that precise offers play in deal settings. So we find in some of our work that sellers who say, I'll sell it to you for $9 do better than sellers who say 10.
Because of the number itself?
Yes. It's because when people hear a round number, they think you mean 8 to 12. They assume you're just like throwing out a number, right? That you didn't do research. It's like based on not that much that you're estimating essentially. And so, you don't want to be counter-normatively precise and bizarrely precise, but having a cover story for the precision and then being precise tends to yield better outcomes than making a more assertive round offer. And it's those more assertive offers that I think run the risk of the social backlash, right? So I think it's especially helpful for women to do something like this.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about something you said earlier is that softening language, because we've heard it all the time that women are criticized for, I'm sorry, but, and, things like that. And that's not what we're talking about here, right? Can you tell me a little bit about the difference?
So there isn't that much on the role of apologies in negotiations. I certainly know that there's so many memes floating around out there about how women are constantly apologizing. And I think they're grounded in reality, right? Many of us need to stop doing that.
Like in meetings and that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. But so if we're talking about like soft language, where my mind goes to is indirect language, is hedging, is saying I was hoping for $100 as opposed to it should be $100. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that women are more likely to soften their language. So there are huge cultural differences here. But on average, I think women tend to soften their speech more so than men do.
Yeah.
That is true in negotiations. I want to be clear here that men do it too.
Yeah.
Men, and the thing is, it's polite. But, I think the concern with using this soft language for saying I was hoping for a raise or I want about $50 as opposed to I want 50. What that signals is that you're not fully committed
Yeah.
you're asking for, that you somehow recognize it's a big ask and maybe illegitimate. So I think that that's the concern about the softening of language in negotiation situations, that people are undermining themselves when they use it.
So maybe it's
Really,
more about how you say it,
but the
of
thing is,
like, I was hoping for this, is
yeah,
different from, well, I was hoping, you know.
yeah, I'm gonna say that like I've got a ton of data on this, and I am not finding that if you say I was hoping for $50, you do worse than if you say 50. And there's a few reasons why that's the case. And actually, let me back up and say that in this example, 50 is ambitious, right? I think you do want to be ambitious, and I think it's fine to say it in a softer way. I was hoping for 50. What we find is that if you say it very directly, it's more likely that your negotiation partner, and it's ambitious, it's more likely that your negotiation partner is going to walk.
Yeah.
It's more likely that your negotiation partner is going to respond with a more extreme counteroffer. And so this don't speak softly, women are talking wrong in negotiations. I am not a fan of that story. I actually don't think that that story's right. I think people should stop telling women to worry about the soft speech in negotiation situations. You do need to ask for ambitious figures, but I think it's perfectly fine to just lean into the way you talk.
That's great to hear, because I think a lot of women will feel so much freer to be able to just do it the way they want to,
Do it. Yes.
instead of feeling like they have to be, kind of this, some hard ass or something, and really go for it. Personally, I've never found that that works better myself either.
And I think some of it's like a mindset shift, right? Where there's lots of ways to think about what negotiations are. But again, I think many of us default to like, it's this competitive, I am, a WWE wrestler exchange. And I'm like, like you need to do a little bit of that, but just that's insufficient. You also need to foster cooperation. I think shifting your mindset and being like, this is joint problem solving, right? I am solving a problem with this person. I think that mindset shift can be really helpful for women.
It helps you put yourself into the other person's shoes more too, of how are they receiving it? What is the benefit that they're getting from it?
I think that's an excellent point. Yes. They're not going to say yes unless it works for them, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. Wonderful. Can you think of anything that we haven't covered yet?
So probably my favorite paper on gender and negotiations was authored by a woman named Malia Mason. She used to be a doctoral student here, and with Michael Morris, who's one of my colleagues. And they had women negotiate, and they were either negotiating on behalf of themselves or they were negotiating on behalf of somebody else. And what they found was that when women were negotiating on behalf of themselves, they weren't as assertive as when they were negotiating on behalf of somebody else. They therefore did less well. So the reason why they had this manipulation, these two groups, where some women were negotiating on behalf of themselves and some were negotiating on behalf of somebody else, is because the latter kind of aligns the stereotype of what women should be like, right? Other-oriented, communal, with being assertive in negotiations, right? So basically it like reveals that it's not that women can't be assertive. They can, but they feel this pressure. They're concerned about the social backlash. And when that concern is present, they're less likely to ask for themselves. And I love it because I think, again, it's not that women can't do it. It's that women have this concern. And it turns out that concern is not crazy. But the other reason why I love it is I do think it suggests a prescription that can be useful. You have to be diplomatic about this. In most negotiation situations, there are other stakeholders. Like someone else stands to benefit from your ask. Almost, 9 times out of 10, you're an agent. Maybe it's your family's interest. It's somebody else, your team's interest that's being represented at the table. I think framing the request in those terms can be helpful. It's easier for people, like mentally, to then be ambitious. And I think it's less likely that you're going to get that social backlash because you're doing what's expected of you given your gender.
Yes, I've seen that in my own practice where clients who are going into a salary negotiation, if we frame it for them of, who are you doing this for? first, and then they think about how their family's going to benefit, how women in general are going to benefit, and kind of broaden that, they'll fight so much harder for everybody else than themselves. So it's really helpful.
That's amazing. Marrying science and practice makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I guess, Jill, there is one other thing that it might be worth saying. I work with women. I know you work with women, and I'm always a little bit torn about offering these strategies to help women do well in negotiations without receiving the social backlash. I want to be helpful, and I think some of these strategies, the reality is they're necessary. However, it's wildly problematic that we are expecting the targets of bias to bend over backwards and come up with these clever ways to thrive given the bias, right? I'm just perpetuating the problem because really I think that it's a systemic issue. Policies need to change, right? Instead of us asking women to take more training and find these sneaky ways to suggest Steve.
I know. I feel the same way. My clients are working in the organization they've got and the situation they've got. And as they rise up in power by doing these things, now they have a lot more power to change things, and they have more voice to be able to say, if that was a man talking, would you feel that same way? And, we need to challenge these things as we go and challenge these biases, but we also want to get where we want to go. And so that we can have so much more power to be able to do that. I think it's, maybe both and.
It's a great way of thinking about it. Change has been slow.
Yes. Slower than maybe we would all like. Oh, thank you so much for talking with me today, Malia. This was so great to be able to chat with somebody who's working in this and researching these things all the time. And I really appreciate your time.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I love listening to the podcast, and hopefully there's something useful in here for people. So thank you.
I'm sure there will be. Yeah, great. If you're ready to fully lean into your feminine leadership and get promoted from director to vice president and beyond, hit that subscribe button so you'll get all the episodes to come. And check out the recommended video here to see how women are rising up without playing by the old rules that built these male-dominated industries and systems.